Bryan Post here. I want to say thank you for joining me for this 30-minute presentation on From Fear to Love, Parenting Difficult Adopted Children, based on my new book, From Fear to Love. Today, we're going to start out with a very important concept. It's called the 3 emotional pathways of expression. Now, my goal for this presentation is to give you a very solid overview of what's covered in the book, From Fear to Love, but to also introduce you to some new concepts, just my way of saying thank you for taking the time to view this presentation. This is one of the new concepts. This concept is actually not covered in the book. This is a concept that I have given some lectures about, but it is not that has not been that widely shared. So you're actually getting a very new concept from me today, and we're going to start off just right from the very beginning covering this very important concept. Now, the 3 emotional pathways of expression are based on the way that you and I, as well as children, use emotional energy to transition and to adjust from point A to point B. So anytime someone asks something of us, we have to go through one of the 3 pathways of expression in order to make that transition. Now, this is really important because I'm going to demonstrate to you where your child is right now. And typically, if you're watching this presentation, or if you've ordered my books or listened to any of the other material at Post+Institute.com, then you're there for a reason, and that's because your child has some special challenges with their emotions and with their behavior. So I hope to reveal to you a perspective that could actually be quite transformative. I'll let you be the judge of that. All right, so I have our 3 emotional pathways of expression. They are attitudes, and even though you're watching me, I really encourage you to write this down. It just helps the reinforcement. Feelings, and behaviors. Now, many of you are parenting or working with children who primarily are stuck at the level of behaviors. Here's what I want you to look at. When you were a child, and this is what I always ask people to do in my lectures, I always say, think first about yourself, because that which you can see in yourself, you can more readily see in others. But that which you cannot see in yourself, it is almost impossible to see it in someone else. And so I really want to help you to shift your paradigm, to change the lens from which you view your child, because that's where the breakthrough occurs. Now, when you were a child and your parents asked you to do something, and I want you to be as honest as you possibly can. They asked you to do something like take out the trash, or fold the laundry, or go clean up your room. What would be typically your natural expression? It would be an attitude expression. So you'd roll your eyes, or you'd huff and you'd puff, or you'd cross your arms in frustration. Well, see, that's the first pathway of emotional expression. That's attitudes. Now, let me ask you, how many of you as parents now, when you were children, could get away with that kind of attitude expression? Rolling the eyes. How many of you have heard, if you roll those eyes one more time, I'm going to knock them in the back of your head? That was common where I grew up. Or, I'll give you something to roll your eyes about. Or, don't huff and puff me, just do what I tell you to do. So you're following where I'm going with that. What happens is because attitudes are not encouraged, in some situations not permitted, not allowed, that emotional pathway gets suppressed. So when you can't express through attitudes, it gets suppressed and it goes to the next level. Feelings, same scenario. How many of you as children, when your folks asked you to do something, you would say, or could say, I'm not going to do that, I don't want to do that, I hate you, you're making me look like I'm not a slave, or you're making me look like a maid around here, this is my home too, I don't have to do that. How many of you could honestly say that to your parents? Not many of us could do that. So what does that mean? Our feelings get suppressed. Now, you can't express through attitudes. You can't express through feelings. So now we're at behaviors. How many of you, when your parents asked you to do the exact same thing, could kick a table over? How many of you could throw a pillow or storm out of the room or run and slam the door or run away even or kick a hole in the wall? See, some of these behaviors you're familiar with because they're probably the behaviors that your children do right now when you ask them to make these emotional transitions. Well, for us, and certainly for me, I wouldn't even think about behaving in that way with my parents. So guess what? My behaviors also get suppressed. Now, if you can't express through attitudes, and you can't express through feelings, and then you can't express through behaviors, guess what's left? Anger and depression. I call this the trauma triangle. Because when you can't express your emotions through your attitudes, through your feelings, you can't express them through your behaviors, you're only left with two options: anger or depression. Now that's where the challenge comes in. Because within anger and depression, naturally you're going to have some behaviors that are reflective of those. And a lot of times we'll bounce back and forth between the two. Dr. Bruce Perry with the Child Trauma Academy says that we all respond to stress in one of two different ways. We become hypo-aroused, meaning we withdraw, we shut down, or we become hyper-aroused. Become aggressive, agitated, irritated. If your emotional pathways of expression are sufficiently expressed, you get trapped down here in the level of anger, depression, and behaviors. Children who've been adopted, because adoption is a traumatic experience, even if it's from birth, it's the separation of the child from the biological figure. That impacts the physiology, the neurology, and the physiology of the child. Now, that's not even considering if there have been other stressful, traumatic events that have occurred in the child's life. Now, a trauma is any stressful event which is prolonged, overwhelming, and unpredictable. So any stressful event which is prolonged, overwhelming, and unpredictable. And what's significant about those kinds of events is that they suppress attitudes, they suppress feelings, and they suppress behaviors, leaving us stuck in anger or depression. And we just vacillate in these levels. Now, down here is where the greatest challenge lies. Not up here, but down here. Down here is where you see all of the challenging behaviors, some of the ones that I cover in From Fear to Love. Lying, stealing, defiance, hoarding. Those kind of behaviors are actually symptoms of a child who is stuck in a suppressed behavioral state. Very important. Because as adults, as parents ourselves, because we grew up in homes where attitudes were not okay, where feelings were not okay, and behaviors were not okay, that we become conditioned actually to not be okay with these expressions when we become parents. So we bring children into our homes, and these children primarily come to your home already trapped in the trauma triangle. Not only are they in an angry or depressed state, or do they have negative behaviors, but they've experienced trauma. They've experienced stressful events which are prolonged, overwhelming, and unpredictable, and can actually start in utero. So you have to be able to shift your mindset when we're talking about trauma, is that trauma a lot of times occurs even in the womb. So some of you may be struggling with that concept. And then you can't forget about the pre and perinatal birth traumas that occur, and then the other traumas that occur, like loss and abandonment and emotional absence and physical abuse and sexual abuse and neglect. The list goes on and on and on. But the point is that your child is stuck in this bottom level of expression. That's their bottom level. Their attitudes, feelings, and everything else have sufficiently suppressed them all the way down here. Now, because of the way we grew up, what happens when our children roll their eyes? What happens when they huff and they puff? We do the same things our parents said. Don't do that. That's not okay. You're being disrespectful. What happens when they express their feelings? I didn't ask for your feelings. I just asked you to do what I told you to do. And then they move down to behaviors. Now, if you've got a child who's already stuck here, then these behaviors just become more intensified. Now, here's what I want you to understand. Because these are our three emotional pathways of expression, we have no other option in our abilities to adjust and to transition other than these three expressive pathways. What that means is I must go through any of these three pathways before I can not be in a behavioral state. If I cannot express through my attitudes, then I've got to express through my feelings. If I can't express through my feelings, I'm stuck with my behaviors. So I'm acting out. But what I have to understand as a parent of a child who is trapped in the trauma triangle is that healing, not behavioral change, not behavioral suppression or behavioral control, but actual healing must occur at this level, and what I must be able to do is to work my child up from behaviors, up to feelings, up to attitudes. See, this is where healing of any challenging child cannot be done separate from the family. As the parent, you create the ultimate healing foundation for that child. That child can go to therapy 2, 4, 5, 6, 7 times a week. It doesn't matter. But they still come home to the foundation of the family. Healing occurs in the family, does not occur outside of the family. And healing a child involves you and I as the parents, because my child is trapped in behaviors. So my child is lying and stealing and angry and yelling and cursing and all these things. And if those same behaviors cause me, which they will, cause me to be stressed, and then I go back to my age-old imprints or parenting blueprints of dealing with them, then what I'm going to do is I'm going to reinforce the suppression. As long as what I am doing to deal with the behaviors is reinforcing the suppression that has already occurred, my child will continue to get worse. The child cannot get better because they're not capable and they're not being taught how to work back up through the emotional pathways of expression. So healing actually occurs for children and their negative behaviors, and these are the things that I try to help you understand in Fear to Love, is that children must act out their behaviors because that's where they are. They are in survival. They are conditioned. They are stuck here. And it is our responsibility to not be upset and overwhelmed by our children's behaviors, but to recognize that behavior is communication for a barrier in expressing higher levels of emotions. Okay? I'm going to say that again. Behavior is a communication of a barrier to expressing higher pathways of emotional communication, of pathways. So what I have to do is when my child is misbehaving, I have to recognize that as a signal that he or she is stuck and has no other options except that behavior. And instead of personalizing that behavior, I have to begin by saying, I want to know how you feel. I need to know how you feel. What's going on? You know what, honey? I can tell something's really going on right now, because when you're feeling good, these things don't happen. What's going on? Please tell me. I need to know. And as you do that, what you end up doing is you end up taking the child through a teaching process of being stuck in this trauma triangle of anger and depression behaviors, back up to feelings. So you're actually reteaching the child how to utilize their emotional pathways of expression. When you can get the child, and I'm going to tell you, just based on my clinical experience and some of the research we've done in some of our treatment homes, this takes to move a child from behaviors up to feelings, and then you have to understand that there's still going to be some vacillation between the two. All right? The behaviors may not always go away entirely. There's always going to be some behavioral challenge, but this process can take anywhere from 6 to 12 months. Now, that's just based on if you can honestly and authentically be with this child through their behavioral expression. If you can't, there's still going to be this constant struggle because the reinforcement is going to continue. Now, once you can really work the child through behaviors, and I know that seems really scary. Your child is yelling at you and cussing at you, and you say, you know what, honey, you seem really angry. Why don't you let me know what's going on? Or your child is stealing, or your child just ran away and just came home the morning before. It seems really contradictory to our historical, traditional parenting approaches to not reinforce the negative behavior, to not get mad at the child, to not become stressed with the child, to not become threatening with the child. Because see, those things are creating a reinforcement. But once we know our child has returned home safely, all right, the single greatest threat of something terrible happening to them while they've been gone is already gone. So why do we need to pound away on that behavior rather than approaching them from a love-based perspective, a perspective of understanding and a perspective of acceptance and acknowledgement that you must have been really stressed out to have been gone all night long. And I need to know what I can do to help you express your feelings, to tell me what's going on before you've got to do this. See, even something like that, I mean, it can go more extreme, it can be more mild, it doesn't matter. The key is you have to move the child from the behaviors up to the feelings. Now, once you get the child in a place that they can begin to trust that they can express their emotions a little more, and you've got to understand that some of this goes back to birth, especially if you have an adopted child who came from an orphanage or who was in a lot of foster care placements. From their earliest experiences, their cry was not okay. All right, their cry for a need or for help or for security, whatever it may have been, was not okay. So it was ignored or denied or suppressed. So this conditioning actually happens over the course of years. This is not something that just happens because of a single experience. This is years and years worth of conditioning. You've got to work that child through those behaviors before they can start to learn that their emotional pathway of feeling expression is okay. Then they have another option. Another option presents itself. So when the child becomes stressed out, instead of immediately going to behaviors, they can express their feelings. Now, can you handle their feelings? All right? Can you handle their feelings? Can you handle it when your child looks at you and goes, "Ah, I hate you"? Can you handle that? Can you really handle it when your child says, "You suck, you're not my parent, you don't love me, you don't care about me"? Can you handle that? See, that's a really big question, because that brings us back over here. See, our parents couldn't handle that expression, so they taught us how to suppress. Now, we've got children who we've worked through behaviors, can you handle their feeling expression to keep them moving up out of this trap? Can you really handle that? Can you really see it? Because now they're in feelings. Now they're in a different pathway of expression. And what you have to understand, and what I want to help you to understand, is these are only pathways of expression. These are not personalizing statements and actions. All right, let me explain that. Your child, in acting out their behaviors, is doing the best that they can in that moment to energetically cope, to energetically survive. Your child, as blatant as it may seem, your child is not intentionally acting out these behaviors up on you. Your child is acting out these behaviors because they are trying to survive. They're trying to shift, do the best they can to shift out of that survival state to a thriving state, because we only have two energy states, a surviving state and a thriving state. We become conditioned in that surviving state, and it takes conditioning to move us into that thriving state. So, can you handle the feeling expression? Because once you get to a place to be able to transcend the traditional practices of parenting about behaviors and about feeling expressions, then you're engaging another teaching mechanism, and that's moving your child from feelings up to attitudes. Now, obviously, if you've had a child who's been engaging in all these negative behaviors, and you've been practicing the love-based approach that we talk about in Fear to Love, and they've now moved up to feelings, which means their negative behaviors have actually diminished, because the more you can start to acknowledge the various emotional pathways, the more the behaviors start to subside. So the more, listen to this, the more I can be okay, not give permission for, or not accept, well, you accept it at some level, but not to condone, the more I can allow you to be where you're at and encourage your feeling expressions, the more those behaviors start to diminish. That's why I say it takes about 6 to 12 months to get to this place where the behaviors have diminished enough that the child is now in a feeling state. Now, once the child gets to a feeling state, it's going to take you about another 6 months of conditioning for them to be able to become more comfortable with their feeling expression. Remember, this is not about you. This is about your child's survival. They don't have any other options. So it's going to take you another 6 months to move from feelings to attitudes. And it's going to vacillate between the two, especially when you're talking about adolescents. Adolescents have very strong feelings and they have very strong attitudes. Suppress those and you know they have very strong behaviors. But if you can work here for another 6 months, and what's more threatening, getting your car window knocked out or your child screaming at you, I hate you? You know, which do you prefer? Me personally, I prefer the feeling statement. All right, so I prefer the feeling expression. If I can continue to encourage my child's feelings and continue to be okay with that, my child is going to begin operating more attitudes. And that's when I ask them to do something, they're going to huff and they're going to puff, and then they're going to drop back down to feelings. They say, I don't really want to do it. And then I back away from them and I give them some space, and before I know it, they've transitioned, because that's what an emotional pathway does. When you can really express through your emotional pathways, it helps you transition, it helps you to adjust better. So when I can permit that space to transition, my child is operating between attitudes and feelings. And guess what? When you can get your child up to a place to where they are operating out of attitudes and feelings, then you've gotten to a place of normalcy. Because that's how all of us engage one another in society, is with attitudes and feelings. We all, even as adults, we roll our eyes, we get upset. And then, you know, we're at work sometimes, we get mad, or with our spouse or a partner, who are our friends. We get upset, we have attitudes, but then we share our feelings. And guess what? We don't have any negative behaviors that go along with it. So this is really the essence. And like I said, that this is a new concept that I'm sharing with you all right now, just to say thank you for taking the time to view this video. And all of this dialogue here, all of this diagram can be applied to challenging behaviors. Every single one of these. I mean, you can put lying, stealing, defiance. You can put all of these down here in this area of behaviors. And let me give you an example of how you would deal with something like lying. So you've got lying as one of the behaviors. And this is very conditioned. Children become very conditioned. First of all, what you have to understand is that the child is lying, and you can actually look at it through this model. That the child is lying because their attitudes and their feelings have been suppressed, so now they must survive. So the child is lying out of survival. What is lying? Lying is fear. The child is saying, in the child's mind, I am saying, the worst thing that ever happened to me is going to happen again, therefore I must lie. Now how do you deal with that? Our traditional approach with lying, your child lies, you say, don't lie to me, or you say, you're lying to me, or you say, I can't handle it. That's your traditional approach. What does it do? It suppresses the behaviors even more. But the love-based approach, the approach that I'm sharing in Fear to Love, is to see the child's lying as survival, and then rather than to react, because see, this side over here is about responding. When we're over here, we're responding. It's very important. When we're over here, we're reacting. Rather than react, I want to respond to the child, and I teach a very simple little formula. It's called ignore the lie, don't ignore the child. So the child tells the lie, you take a few deep breaths, you're responding, you say, you know what, honey, everything's going to be okay. Everything is going to be all right. I don't want you to worry. And then you walk away from the child. You don't acknowledge that they've lied. You don't do anything else. You give them a little pat. You say everything's going to be okay. You keep breathing yourself. You walk away. As you do that, as you breathe, you're engaging your responsibility. You're responding. Now, you wait a little while. You come back and you say, you know what, honey? When you tell me a lie, I didn't say, now tell me the truth. I didn't say, you know, earlier when you lied to me, I didn't like it. I didn't say that. When you tell me a lie, it really hurts me. It scares me. It makes me feel like you don't trust me. That's all you're doing. The child is thinking, which lie is he talking about? All right? So you say, it hurts me, it scares me, and it really makes me feel like you don't trust me, and if you don't trust me, I can't keep you safe. I want you to know that we're okay, and everything's going to be all right. Ignore the lie, don't ignore the child, and then you walk away. And what you just did is you put the child in a space to have to think about the lie that they told, to have to think about, because Joseph Ledoux says in times of stress, our thinking becomes confused and distorted, and our short-term memory is suppressed. So you're actually giving them an opportunity to think about the lie, to realize that you're not a threat, and that is an internal shift. See, when we're operating from our historical traditional practices, then we're not creating internal shifts, we're creating external shifts. And Fear to Love is about helping you as a parent learn how to teach your child from the inside out, because that's where behavior change and healing really occurs. So when you can do that enough, eventually you'll find that your child, instead of lying, comes up and can express feelings. And instead of expressing behaviors and feelings, can actually express attitudes. So that's just one really simple way that you can apply this model. So I really would encourage you to watch this video again, rewind it, pay attention to it, and then also to take advantage of the Fear to Love packages that we're offering you today, because it's just going to enhance your understanding of this model, this love-based model, which is a paradigm shift away from what we've usually done with difficult children. So with that said, my name is Bryan Post. You can visit me at Post+Institute.com. Thank you for joining me.